Welcome to the start of the podcast series, Living Free. Today is the first episode, and you know how in life there's a rule, there's a regulation, there's a stipulation, a policy about everything concerning life in this world. There's governmental laws and policy that rules over us, that governs over how us to dictate what we can and cannot do, or to show a path in how to do something. Then there are the legal requirements of society that stipulate what we are not to do and what we should or should not do, again governing our lives. There's the unwritten rules and laws of society that dictate how we should live our lives, like how we should our appearance, how we should appear, how we should conduct ourselves, what is good and what is not good. There are all kinds of rules and regulations in this society that has been set up as either a way of guidance or a measure in which we are expected to conduct ourselves. It measures us based on what has been laid out for us in our conduct, measures what we can achieve or what we should know is expected of us. These measures have been set in place to cause us to know what we can and cannot do, and as such it has set our mindset, set our perceptions of what we are able to do. These regulations have become the stipulation of law in our minds that tells us where we can go, how we can act, and what we can and cannot achieve, so that these regulations, these rules are what we use to govern ourselves, to let us know how far we can advance in life, to let us know what we're able to do, which often causes us to become limited in how we perceive ourselves, limited in what we perceive we can do, limited in what we believe is possible for us in our daily lives. And so the regulations and the stipulations of the laws of society has become the standard by which we have set limitations for ourselves. The law of God that God has given us to govern our lives is to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue and take dominion. So dominion is the standard that God has set for us, and it has been his expectation of us, but because of the governmental laws over us, we have become regulated into living our lives by the standards of what the world says is possible. And so in our own perceptions, because we are limited, we only try so much, we only aim so far, and has become almost robotic in what we believe we can do. Robots has to follow a programming that the inventor, the creator, has placed in it, so that the robot is limited to acting only based on what the robotic stipulation has been programmed in it, right? So when we likewise allow only the laws and the rules of society to determine how we act, we are being robotic in that we are being programmed in how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and what we see is possible. For instance, the education system really educates us to follow a certain path, and educating us to follow a certain path. We are only given certain information that allows us to make the choices and decisions that those who have set up the system wants us to follow. It sets in place rules, regulations, policies, all of those things that causes us to make choices based on the direction they would like our lives to go in. And for the most part, especially in America, the education system is set up to educate. The career parts of the education system is to teach you how to use your skills to find a job. And so it is teaching you how to become an employee, not an employer, unless you specifically choose to go against that. And that is the point that I'm making here, is that the systems have the world have been set up to dictate how we live our lives. It has been set up to set the standards for us of what we should expect our lives to be and to become. It is giving us rules and regulations that direct us on a certain path, so that it determines the choices that we make according to what is presented before us as possible. Our opportunities that we see are only what is shown to us according to the world system's life. We are being shown pictures of what our expectations should be, of what our choices and our opportunities are. And so we are actually being bound. And so brought me to this place where he is freeing me and allowing me to teach this series to help us all to get free of systematic programming that it limits us in our lives. Limit how we choose, what we choose, how we live. So the Lord is breaking us out of limitations. And in this series, I am going to be tackling different aspects to show us how the Lord has already freed us to live in the dominion that he has called us to. And the Lord has made us know that we are not to become regulated. We are not to let go of the freedom that he has given us. The verse that I am looking for here is Galatians 5:1 that says, "Stand fast therefore in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage." Because the Lord has made us free in that he has given us liberty to live in dominion. Dominion is the standard that God has given us to live our lives, so that it is what frees us from the rules of society, the regulations of society. Our minds are supposed to be perceiving dominion, how to live in dominion, but instead our minds are perceiving how to follow rules, so that we often become entrenched in a yoke of bondage. We become entrenched in following what we are told to do, how we are told to do it, so that our minds only lead us based on what we see as normal, based on what we see as what the standards that we should follow, what others have achieved. Our perceptions about life and possibilities are to show ourselves able to do what we have been told we should be able to do. And God is saying, be not entangled with the yoke of bondage. Entangling with the yoke of bondage is to become entangled mentally and spiritually and emotionally based on what those rules have told us. So right now we are living entangled in bondage if our only perceptions is to live within the confinements of the regulations of society. I am going to be coming from the book of Esther mostly. I'm looking at breaking free of this system. In order to break free of the system of this world, first of all, you have to recognize the rules and the regulations that are binding you. You have to know what limits you and causes you to stay within a certain space, that causes you to be boxed in, so that you know what it is that you are trying to break free of. And you have to know what it is you're trying to break into. If you're breaking out of something and you don't know where you're going, then you're going to also end up in a desert place where you have more deadness and dryness than you had in the place that you were coming out of. So you have to know what the limitations are that you are breaking out of, and you have to know what is the trajectory that you want to go towards. And so in your movement, you have to be very specific. You have to be very conscious and very aware of where you are transitioning from and where you are transitioning to. Queen Vashti gives an example for us in that. Queen Vashti is in the first chapter of the book of Esther. If you are aware of the book of Esther, you can remember that in the first chapter. If not, you can also read it. First chapter of Esther in the Bible. Queen Vashti was called by King Ahasuerus, her husband, to come before him and present herself because he wanted to show off her beauty. And so Queen Vashti, not wanting to live the lifestyle anymore where she was being dictated to, where she had to be following rules and regulations that regulated her into a certain lifestyle that boxed her in, decided that she was going to refuse King Ahasuerus' command for her to come before him. When she refused King Ahasuerus, she knew the consequences of her actions, right? She knew that if she refused to go before this king, it could cost her her life, it could cost her being put out of the queenship, right? And so she knew she was taking a chance when she refused to go before the king when he called for her. We have been told in history that she refused to go before the king because the king requested that she come before him naked. But no, because that was not the standard of the day. The standard of the day for women was that how they dressed was regulated, right? Just like we see in the Middle East right now, how women have to dress a certain way according to the laws of the country. At that time, it was the same thing that was in place, and women could not bear themselves. They could not show skin in that time unless they were a prostitute or want to be considered a loose woman. And so when the king requested for his wife to come before him, he would not have requested that she come before him naked unless he wanted to present his wife as being a loose woman or as being a prostitute. In fact, in the first book of Esther, where Vashti is stories told, it says the king asked for her to come before him in her royal attire, wearing her royal crown. So he wanted her to be dressed like a queen, be dressed in the royal attire that the queen would wear. He specifically requested that. So he was dictating that she come before him. He was dictating how she should come before him. He was specifying to her what he wanted her to be and who he wanted her to be, what he wanted her to look like, to act like, her mannerisms, everything about her was commanded by the king. So her queenship, even though she was in a position of power, she had no power because she was treated like a servant, because it is a servant that you dictate to what they should do, how they should do, just like an employer is able to set the times that you work, and they set the place that you work at, so that your life really revolves around your job. So Vashti was in a job instead of being her own boss, which is what being a queen would suggest. So as I said, she was in a place, a position of power, but she herself had no power. And so Vashti was refusing to be commanded anymore. When she refused the king, she was refusing to have her life dictated to her, how she could do, what she could do, when she can do, how she can do. She was making a statement that she wanted to be free, and she will no longer live her life under the dictates of a system, which is what the king represents. And so in this life, to break free of the system, the first thing that it shows here is your determination that you are going to live your life in a different way. You have to make up your mind that you no longer want to be controlled and be told how you can live, how far you can advance, what you have to do to get to the advancement that they are in you. You have to make up in your mind that it is time for change. That is the first thing that we saw here with Queen Vashti, that she made up her mind that she was going to quit this job. She was going to stop working for a boss that could regulate her standard of life, everything concerning her, right? And then she decided how she was going to go about it. She refused to go before the king, so she refused to obey the rules anymore that had been set up to determine what she should do. Like she refused to be commanded in how she lived anymore. Like she was not rebelling, she was refusing. A lot of times I've heard it preached how Vashti was in rebellion, but Vashti was not rebelling. Vashti was making a stand. She was standing for her right, for her freedom to live her life as she wanted to. She had made up her mind that no longer was she going to belong to somebody. She was no longer going to sell herself to someone for her upkeep, because in calling for her in her royal garments is really him calling for her to present herself in all that she was. Everything that she was as a person was given to him, and what being able to hold the queenship was what she gave in order to be queen. So now she was refusing to give up herself, to give up her talents and her gift any longer just to survive. And so Queen Vashti did not want to continue life like it is, so she quit. She quit being queen. She decided that it was better to risk her life than to live any longer in the situation that she was in, where she was bound and could go no further, where she was bound and could not determine for herself what she wanted to do with her life, which is what poverty and financial lack does to us, right? It keeps us in a place where we can't move, because in order to move you have to meet this, and you have to be able to meet a certain standard. You have to be able to pay for the college degree, but then in order to pay for the college degree you have to take out loans, and then take out loans. When you are finished and you think that now is your time to live, you find that you are bound by those loans, because you will have to pay back those loans. So those loans, they now put you in a place where you are in the same cycle of giving everything you have just to get by, just to get enough, just enough to survive. You never find yourself coming out of that place. So the Lord is calling us now to come out of that place of being bound based on us giving up our gifts to someone else who is able to dictate how we live our lives. And Vashti, it was about letting go of a position that gave her everything that she could ever want when it comes to being a woman. I am sure when it comes to having clothes and things like that, Vashti had it. But the type of clothes she wore was dictated by the king. The times she got up, where she went, who she went with, all of that was dictated by the standards of the position that she was in. And so Vashti had to be willing to give up that lifestyle. She had to be willing to give up that security, to let go of that safety zone for her, that safety net for her, in order to be able to move forward from just living in a box, from just living for enough, right? Because no matter how abundant you are, if you are not able to live freely, then you are just you're living in subsistence. You're living with just enough. Vashti was a queen who was giving up her position, even though it meant that she was risking her life. Do you notice something here? That she was so locked in by this position that she couldn't even quit the position without risking her life. She couldn't ask for a divorce without it costing her her life. To show you how limiting the position was for her in that day and age, it is representing also how limiting it was for women in that day and age. So if you look at it, that Vashti being queen was actually making a stand, not just for herself but for the women of that day. She was making a stand that she would no longer be treated like this, so that she was standing for the women also in her day and age. In the chapter, it shows you that when Vashti left the queenship, when Vashti was put out of being queen, she didn't leave it, she refused, right? And in her refusing, she knew she would be put out of being queen. So she was in essence quitting. So when Vashti did what she did and refused the king, it didn't just affect her, it affected all the women in King Ahasuerus' kingdom. Because later on, when he called and all the men together, what they said to him was to put Vashti away from being queen, and also to make a decree stating that all the men should rule in their home. And that was because they wanted to prevent the women from acting like Vashti acted. So we recognize right there that what Vashti did affected all women in the kingdom to determine how they were treated. So Vashti was in essence breaking a law in order to try and make a difference, to try and create change in her time. She was stepping away from what was the norm because she wanted a different outcome for her life. Which is what breaking away from the rules mean. When I said in the beginning, you have to know what you're breaking up with and where you're transitioning to. Right now, everything I have said is about you breaking up with rules and regulations that bind you really to keep you from advancing in life. I am not saying you just break rules for the sake of breaking rules, or you become resented, you have resentment because an employer did this or that and so you quit your job. The point is to recognize where you're coming from and where you're going to. And so Vashti was making a point in taking a stand about the standard of life she wanted to live. She had made a decision concerning the standard of life that she wanted to live. And she was breaking away from a standard that kept her from living at the standard that she had made up her mind that she wanted for herself. And the actions that she took is what was available to her in that day and age. As I was saying, she didn't even have the ability to request a divorce without it being held against her to cost her her life. And so her stance had to be that she made the decision that she was going to suffer the consequences of what happened to her, because she knew that breaking up with the king meant she was going to be kicked out of the palace and out of the position that she was in. So she had made up in her mind to suffer the consequences that was going to come after the decision that she made. Right? And so our choices comes with consequences or rewards. So we have to know what is the consequence of our actions and what is going to be the reward of her actions. For her, the reward was just no longer being dictated to. She didn't have a plan for anything else other than that she just did not want to be her life dictated anymore. She knew her consequences was that she was going to be kicked out and possibly beheaded for rejecting an order from the king. So her choice really was that the consequences that she would face would be worth her living her life no longer being king, or that she died. She'd rather be dead than live in those circumstances anymore. Her consequences dictated that she made the choice, or she could not take what was happening to her anymore. So the consequences for her was better than living in the situation that she was in. And so she chose a way out that benefited her no longer being in the situation that she was in, even though it didn't make a better way for her forward. So we have to look at our choice here and not just jump into making the decision to break up with a position that we're in. You want to come out of the difficulty you're in, you want to come out of the bondage of financial lack in your life, then you have to be specific concerning where you are going forward. You have to know how you're going to gain access to where you're going forward and not just jump out of a situation into a worse situation. Not jump out of the fire, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Vashti left the queenship, and she left the queenship with an example of not taking it anymore, of moving out of that position so that she no longer had to live that life. Esther made it possible to make the way forward. Esther was the example of moving out of one position to access another position. Esther was the one that filled the position that Vashti was put out of. I was going to say vacated, but really she was put out of the position. And so Esther took up the position where as queen that Vashti had to leave. And Esther, knowing who Vashti was, what Vashti did, and how and what happened with Vashti, made the decision also that she, when she was in a situation, that she was going to have to step out of line of the commands that she had to follow in order to save her life. Vashti was giving up her life, but Esther was giving up the bondage that she was in to save her life. So Esther's choices was different from Vashti. She was willing to suffer consequences, and Esther was willing to take a chance to gain access to more than what she had. Esther went against the tradition of being called before the king before you could go before the king, because her life was threatened, right? Because she had the threat of death. So Esther was avoiding death and not giving herself over to death. She didn't create the threat for herself. The threat was created by Haman, who hated Mordecai and the Jews. So Esther, while she wanted to come out of the situation that she was in, she was willing to do it in a more correct way that would allow her a way forward. Esther made the choice to go before King Ahasuerus, even though he didn't call her and present herself. So when she went before him, she went in a way that presented her in a way where she could be received, because what she was doing was seeking a way forward. She was seeking to gain access to the things that she could see but not had access to. In this world we can see the beautiful picture of all these things, but what we have been told limits us to only be able to reach a small part of it. Esther could see all that was there that she could have, but she could not reach it without gaining access, because where she was being in a position that held her bound by the rules and the regulations of the system of the day, of the traditions of the day, of the morals and the code of conduct and ethics of that day. All of those things held her bound, so that she could only do so much for herself. And she had a position again where she had power but no access to that power. She had power, but the position had power, but she herself had no power. And so she had to make up in her mind that she was going to go against the grain, go against what was usual for her, so that she could gain access to what she saw was there. So in pulling herself out of the situation, what she did was she went and presented herself to the king based on another set of rules. A set of rules that gave her access. She rejected the rules that bound her to living at a certain level and decided that she was going to use the rules that gave her access to get out of the situation that she was in and to access the king who made the rules without her having to wait to be called. And so what Esther did to move forward in her life, she found out what it took to gain access, right? She found out what it took to go to another level. I am going to be doing a second episode, and that episode will be about living free of consequences, living free of the fear of punishment, because Esther was facing punishment. She was facing consequences for going against what the king said. Like Vashti took the consequences, but Esther made sure she did what it took to avoid those consequences. And so that is going to be the next episode.